Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We're going to be running through NetSPI's product today in conjunction with Trinexia, value-added distributor based in Dubai. So again, just to reiterate what Jay said earlier, please feel free to put any questions you have in the Q&A section or in the chat box during the webinar as we'll answer them towards the end. A quick intro into who we are. Trinexia is a pan-EMEA specialty value-added distributor and a leader in providing the most trusted solutions within cybersecurity, digital forensics, application security, identity payments, data security, and governance. We are a pure-play provider of cybersecurity and digital forensic solutions to both public and private sector enterprises. Today, we're excited to collaborate with one of our strategic vendors, namely NetSPI, for this virtual workshop. NetSPI is the leading provider of cybersecurity services, specializing in penetration testing, vulnerability management, and risk assessments. Their advanced approach combines cutting-edge technology with human expertise to help organizations identify and mitigate security threats. By offering tailored solutions, NetSPI empowers businesses to proactively protect their assets and reduce exposure to cyber risks. With a focus on innovation and comprehensive security testing, NetSPI is trusted by enterprises to safeguard their systems, networks, and applications. Today on the call, we have Sam Kirkman, Director of Services for EMEA at NetSPI, to delve deeper into the NetSPI value proposition. Sam is an experienced pen tester and security consultant with a focus on translating complex technical subjects into actionable intelligence. Due to this, Sam has been asked by the BBC to provide expert insights on breaking news stories on multiple occasions. His work has covered a broad range of industries and specialisms, ranging from security architecture at the level of national government to tailored security testing for some of the largest businesses on the planet. Today, he is part of the NetSPI leadership team for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, supporting the delivery of exceptional cybersecurity services to organizations around the world. With that, I'd like to hand over to Sam. Sam, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Calvin, and good day to everyone listening. I'm going to swap over the display now to my content and we'll get started. All right, perfect. And I'll turn my camera on as well. All right, thank you very much for joining us. So today's session, as Calvin so kindly explained, is all about proactive security. And that's part of my job here at NetSPI in partnership with Trinexia, to help organizations around the world understand what proactive security is and how they can use it to help their organizations. So today's virtual workshop is all about building that proactive security playbook. And I'll explain a little bit more about what that's going to mean in today's session. So we're actually going to start with something that I hope you'll find interesting, a little bit of a break away from the strategy side of cybersecurity into a real-world incident that you may well have come across already. Bybit is a cryptocurrency exchange based in Dubai, close to many of the organizations listening today, and they experienced what can only be described as the biggest cryptocurrency heist in history. We'll touch a little bit on how that happened, and perhaps more importantly, what it means for you and your organization, wherever you are in the world. We'll then, of course, touch on what I mean by proactive security alongside NetSPI and the Trinexia team. That phrase is used in different ways around the world, and understanding what we mean by it will help to make sense of what we mean when we make some recommendations around how you can build proactive security into your own flow. That implementation is one of the key takeaways that I'd like to see everyone be able to walk away with today, understanding how you can use it to get more out of your time and budget than you can today when it comes to your security. And of course, I'll touch on how NetSPI can help in that space too. Now, Calvin did a very helpful intro to give you a bit of background on me, but I always have this slide in just to make sure that you know enough about who I am to decide whether my skill set is appropriate to be talking about this kind of thing. So Calvin did mention I'm a pen tester by background. That is still the case today. I may be a director, but I'm still actively testing customer systems around the world. And I do that alongside the rest of the team that I work with to make sure that we've got the right skills in the right place. So I'm still on the sharp end of things. Perhaps more interestingly, though, that isn't the only thing that I do. So finding bugs is all exciting stuff, but actually engineering and architecting fixes and protections around those has been a big part of my career too. That combination means that it's much easier for me to articulate not only how to identify a security issue, but how we can fix it too, which is why I've been very fortunate to be involved in quite a lot of conversations with organizations around the world at different scales, trying to work out how they can get their security where they want it to be instead of just identifying the holes in there too. If you do want to find me, there's a link to LinkedIn there. I'll probably have that on the last slide, or you can get in touch after the event too. So let's take a moment to have a look at the big picture, and this will be relevant to some of the content that we'll cover today too. So sophisticated attacks have been around for a while, but the level of sophistication is going up. Bybit, as we'll cover on the next couple of slides, is probably the best example that we've seen in quite a long time. And the reason that we know that is that the group behind the attack were not only using sophisticated tools and approaches to execute it, but the investigation post-attack was also made rather public in a good effort to try and communicate the level of risk that we're all facing around the world and to help us all understand how it happened and what we can do about it. As you may have seen before, a lot of the most sophisticated attacks in the world are very, very difficult to follow and trace, particularly where they're executed by nation-state groups, so NSA, North Korea, other nations around the world that have incredibly sophisticated teams. It is difficult to understand exactly what they did. Fortunately, there's some great data on the Bybit attack, and we can learn from that. What it also tells us is about supply chain risk, which is an insidious component of the cybersecurity space. You can have incredibly good security within your own organization. Perhaps you're a CISO or a security leader and you feel like you are doing a great job. You may well be doing a great job. But one of the risks that it is incredibly difficult to mitigate is third-party risk, your suppliers. The Bybit attack shows us all about that, and I can also talk to you a little bit about how Tranexia and NetSPI can help you mitigate and understand some of this risk in ways that you might not have been looked at before. This is all on a backdrop of geopolitics and a particularly unstable world at this point in history. I won't go into the specific conflicts that exist around the world, but we will be aware of what those are. And perhaps most interestingly, from a security point of view, is the dependencies that we have in the modern world. We have fiber optic cables running between nations that have been interfered with over recent weeks and months and years even. And on top of that, we have the simple geopolitical relationships between nations encouraging challenges to pop up when nations will disagree, and you have trade impact that also impacts us in cyberspace, whether it's the direct shipping of chips and hardware, or if it's just software and license restrictions that are applied around the world. All of that can lead to disruption that can affect any organization, whether you are working as a for-profit business or you're a public sector entity looking after the needs of a nation of people. That disruption can affect all of us, and it's something we need to plan around. Something that's been very difficult to plan around is emergent technology, always has been. And the latest of that is AI. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to spend the next hour talking about AI. I'm sure you've heard a lot about it, but it is something that we're going to touch on a little bit here and there. And it's certainly something I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A about if it's something you'd like to delve into a little bit more. One of the key messages that I'm pushing from a proactive security point of view is that AI cannot be the solution to everything, and it can in fact introduce some problems too. It is a great tool, and used carefully, it could help to alleviate some of the constraints that we're facing in the security space. The ability to analyze large volumes of data fast and get some meaningful insights from that is a great use case for AI. Trying to use it to make very critical security decisions at this stage is something we've been working on for years, but haven't quite nailed. There's some great technology out there already that uses AI, but it only works if it's used correctly. The problem with most AI is that it's non-deterministic. And what that means is that you can provide the same inputs and get different outputs in different cases. And that makes it very difficult to make consistent decisions or understand the logic behind AI. This is particularly true for large language models, which are the most popular type of AI that we're seeing today. Machine learning's been around for a while, and then large language models are perhaps the most recent and most well-recognized iteration. And to build all of those, there is a huge volume of data capture. For anyone that uses LinkedIn, There was a state where LinkedIn enabled data capture of all posts that you would make on LinkedIn to train their AI models. That was enabled by default. They did add a feature to disable that, but if you're listening to me now, you use LinkedIn and you haven't disabled that feature, there will be a toggle somewhere in the settings to disable use of your data for machine learning and training of large language models. That wasn't particularly well communicated, and that gives us a bit of a precedent for what we're going to see across the industry more broadly. Companies like Slack and a few of the other messaging platforms have also started to use AI to capture data. Now, ideally, that shouldn't be a problem. We'll all benefit from large language models that are useful for us, and there shouldn't be a security issue. The problem, as many of you may have guessed from what I've said already, is that if we encounter a breach of one of these organizations that is capturing data to train models, the data that we trusted them with could be at a much higher risk of exposure than it ever has been before. So it's well worth looking at whether or not the use of the products you currently use is exposing data in a way that you didn't previously have an awareness of. For now, though, we're going to delve into something specific, and that's this Bybit attack. We're going to have a look into this because it sets a great foundation for looking at what proactive security is and how companies like Trinexia and NetSPI can fit into that. And I hope you'll find it interesting too. You may well have seen this in the news already, but this really was the biggest crypto heist in history. We're talking $1.5 billion that was siphoned off Bybit and directly went to North Korea. We've got some good evidence to suggest that it was the Lazarus Group that was behind this particular heist. So how on earth did this actually happen, and what does it mean for us? Well, this was a classic supply chain compromise attack. North Korea didn't target Bybit directly. They were pretty aware that Bybit had some excellent security in place. So to target Bybit would have been exceptionally difficult. Bybit are based in Dubai and have a very good set of resources to defend themselves against this kind of attack. So instead, the North Korean team, Lazarus Group as they are known, decided to target a component, a critical component of Bybit's operations. That is Safe Wallet. For those of you that aren't familiar with the crypto space, I know there's some that may not be. When I say wallet, I am referring to what you might describe as a bank account. Wallets in the crypto space work in a very similar way to a bank account. They hold your money and they allow you to make transactions to and from other wallets or other accounts. Safe Wallet is one of the organizations that provides a platform for managing those wallets and making payments. And that is why the Lazarus Group targeted them. More specifically, they targeted a developer that worked for SafeWallet, somebody that had access to the internal systems of SafeWallet and the systems that are used by SafeWallet customers. Most interestingly, they seemed to target the SafeWallet developer with a social engineering attack that involved a stock market machine learning model. So it's early stages at this stage, but we can see some evidence that this developer downloaded a Docker container with seemingly no relation to their day job that was about predictions for the stock market. Now, of course, that Docker container was just a cover story for malware that the Lazarus Group was then able to get onto the laptop of the developer. And it was that malware that was used by the Lazarus Group to pivot into Amazon Web Services, the cloud environment that SafeWallet uses to run its core operations. Now, ideally, that developer shouldn't have had direct access to the production environment of SafeWallet. So there are some real questions around the security that the SafeWallet team implemented and how it was possible for a single developer's laptop to have direct access to production. Part of what we talk about in the security space and some of these proactive steps that we recommend are separating your production environment where possible from your development environment, wherever you're responsible for running software. In an ideal world, that developer shouldn't have had any access to production under normal circumstances. The only access they should have had is to a development environment, and from there, they should have been able to push their code to a central repository. And that's where continuous integration and continuous delivery, you might have heard of that referred to as CI/CD. That process should have enabled clear code review, and then a promotion of that code into the production environment where the only system that can access production is the CI/CD pipeline. That way you get that separation that clearly wasn't present in the SafeWallet environment. So the Lazarus Group, this was early February, around the 4th of February, that they got access to a developer's laptop and were able to find credentials to get into Amazon Web Services. From there, they spent the next week or two looking around the environment and understanding what it was that they had access to. That's really important from an attacker's point of view, because if they were to simply start tearing things down in the Amazon Web Services environment and ask for a ransom, they would have been lucky to get they would have been lucky to get a 6 or 7 figure sum. So a few $100,000, maybe a few $1 million if they were lucky, by simply disrupting operations. And there's a strong possibility that the Safe Wallet team could have cut off the credentials that they were using and locked them out of the environment, leaving them with nothing. So they spent time doing their research. And they did so in a way that was very difficult to be detected. There was some evidence from Safe Wallet's investigation that there were some indications of compromise, but there was not enough for the Safe Wallet team to identify a breach and stop it at this stage. That gave the Lazarus Group enough time to identify an S3 bucket. So for anyone that's unfamiliar, that is an area in AWS where you can upload files, and it is often used, as is the case here, to put JavaScript files for web applications. And that is what the Lazarus Group targeted. So they had access to just about everything inside SafeWallet, and they chose to target a very specific JavaScript file. So SafeWallet, because they are a wallet organization, they handle financial transactions and the interface required to manage your finances in the crypto space. They have a web interface, an interface that's designed for their customers to use to make and receive transactions using cryptocurrency, just like you would use any other website. Just like any other website, that website is built on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There are some frameworks in there too, but ultimately it relies on the same basic source code that any other website would work on. As a result of that, once the Lazarus Group understood that that was the case and they were confident that they could manipulate that code, that's exactly what they chose to do. So they found a JavaScript file that they could inject with malicious code, and that is what they did to replace the original with a malicious North Korean version of that file. That is the only change that they made to SafeWallet's environment. No other major changes were made at this stage. And what that meant is that when Bybit attempted to move $1.5 billion US from their cold wallet, their high security environment, into their active warm or hot wallet, as it's known, which is the one that you can make frequent transactions from, they trusted that the safe wallet process could be used to make a multi-signature transaction from one location to another. What that means is that Bybit had some good security in place. They were using what they believed to be a trustworthy third party. And when they were making payments, they required and mandated that multiple members of staff at Bybit would have to cross-sign that transaction. So I would sign that transaction, for example, and then another couple of the people on this call would also have to go onto the SafeWallet website and also sign that transaction with their own credentials. That, in an ideal world, should have prevented any scenario where a single person could maliciously transfer money from one location to another. That was a very good control against a single malicious employee being able to operate in isolation. And it's one of the reasons why SafeWallet was chosen as a platform for transactions like this. Unfortunately, the adjustments that had been made to that JavaScript file meant that that payment never actually went to the Safe Wallet process. Instead, the JavaScript file manipulated the transaction to remove the requirement for cross-signing, so it only required a single person to initiate the transaction. And furthermore, it was incredibly precise. The North Korean team, the Lazarus Group, did not edit that JavaScript file to siphon all funds that were sent through SafeWallet. The only address that was targeted was the Bybit wallet address. Any other transaction going through SafeWallet, any other legitimate payment, would go straight through as normal. So the Lazarus Group had identified inside SafeWallet's infrastructure that Bybit was the organization they wanted to target as a company based in the Middle East with significant financial resources. And therefore they targeted just Bybit, which meant that when Bybit made that transaction, and it was a $1.5 billion US transaction specifically from a wallet that the Lazarus Group identified, it went via the malicious path and was immediately sent to the DPRK, to the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. As a result, that money was gone by the time that the Bybit team were able to identify that the transaction hadn't completed and landed in the expected account. Unfortunately, due to the way that cryptocurrency works, there is no recall system. There's no support system. When something like this happens, the transaction is cryptographically complete by the time that you'll identify the issue in the vast majority of cases. And unfortunately, the Lazarus Group are well equipped to prevent any kind of recovery of these funds. So that money is unfortunately gone, and the Bybit team are not at fault for that in a direct sense. The problem with what we're looking at here is that your own security is only part of the picture. And Bybit, for all of their capabilities, did not take a sufficiently proactive approach, working with partners like NetSPI and Tranexia, to take some steps to prevent this kind of thing happening. We're going to touch on that a little bit more later on, but the big message for now is that looking after your own security with the right kind of tools in place isn't enough to protect you from attacks like this. Taking a proactive approach that includes things like scenario-based testing to simulate things like this and understand how you would prevent it in your own organization is the level that we need to work at to prevent this kind of thing. Now, I know it's always nice to hear a little bit about stuff that is going on in your part of the world. So the other thing I wanted to quickly touch on is the world of aviation, which is something that we enjoy working in NetSPI. So while I can't speak about the specific organizations that we've been working with, what I can say is that we've enjoyed working with various partners inside the aviation and particularly the aviation entertainment space. One of the things we did recently is have a look at the infotainment system that was used by various airlines around the world, including the Middle East, Africa, and I believe Australia as well. That infotainment system enabled connectivity across the aircraft. You may well have been on an aircraft that uses something similar. This is the ability to call other people and the aircraft using the in-seat calling system. You can obviously watch films, do all the usual, and you can also control your seat using a separate device too. Those systems are quite convenient and a pleasure to use if you are on an aircraft for an extended period of time. But from a security point of view, they're not necessarily designed with security in mind. We were working with an organization to demonstrate that there were some real vulnerabilities in their design, vulnerabilities that allowed us to take control of various seats across the aircraft, not just our own, manipulate what was displayed on the screen, and also demonstrate that we could control the lighting and the window blinds, and perhaps most concerningly, the call bells for the cabin crew as well, which would have meant that somebody with malicious intentions could have sat on board that aircraft at 30,000 feet and had various lights flashing inside the cabin and also the bells going off for the cabin crew at almost every seat on the aircraft at the same time. That would be unnerving enough that there is a very real possibility that that aircraft would be diverted. And if that attack were to take place across multiple aircraft, the disruption could have cost many millions of dollars. These are the kind of things that organizations are not necessarily aware are risks. And that's where proactive security becomes a key part of their approach to preventing what seems like crazy scenarios from becoming very real scenarios. So let's have a look at what I mean when I say proactive security. And the good news is that this is very close to what you are familiar with already. It's a spin on the familiar. So proactive security is about taking the basic principles and expanding on them. So we need to know what we have first and foremost. Most organizations will have some kind of asset inventory, but it is quite common that I work with organizations where their asset inventory consists of an Excel spreadsheet, and occasionally they might have moved into something like Snow or ServiceNow to get a bit of a better index to work with. In almost every single case I have ever worked with, that asset inventory is incomplete. It leaves gaps that mean there is limited visibility of some of the assets that you're responsible for protecting. The risk that comes with that is if you don't know about it, it's very difficult to put adequate controls in place. And it is certainly difficult to prioritize. One of the other big issues that we see is that organizations are prioritizing based on what's exciting in the market. Maybe a new product that you've seen from a vendor just like NetSPI that you think that looks like a solution to my problem. Maybe it is, but without evidence-based planning, you might well be spending money on something that isn't delivering the value that you need. So in the case of prioritization, proactive security means going beyond the initial, does this look like a good product and can I afford it? It means going to the level of understanding what your risks are and how you mitigate them. But I'll touch on that properly in a few moments. Remediation is, of course, really important in this industry, and it's something that is generally done fairly well as long as it is done. One of the biggest problems that I see is organizations that have some great data through things like penetration testing and tooling, but they don't have the time and resources to put adequate remediation processes in place. So you'll find organizations that can tell you they've got 50,000 vulnerabilities spread across another 5 to 10,000 assets, but they haven't got the time to actually fix them. They've done the vulnerability scans, they've done the penetration tests, and they have the reports, but they haven't necessarily fixed things. Or if they are, they're fixing things far more slowly than the rate at which they're identifying things. Unfortunately, that has a tendency to lead to scenarios where serious vulnerabilities are still present, even in environments that have great security tooling and competent security teams. So when I say proactive security, what I'm saying is we take the same principles we currently have and we fix the flaws that are so common in our own organizations and certainly competitors around the world. So I think it's worth talking about this in a little more detail. Let's take a look at the most common path that we come across at NetSPI, and you might be able to relate to some of this. I'm then going to touch on a better path, and this is the playbook that you can follow in your organization. So let's start with the common, less good approach. What we've got on screen is a very common objective used around the world. This is the general approach that many chief information security officers will take, and it starts with a high-level objective. It is, I need to prevent some kind of successful attack on my organization. Let's pick ransomware as an example. Now, their first port of call is going to be build a list of solutions and deadlines so that they can distribute that to the organization and present it to the rest of the board. That usually takes the form of, we'll bring in a company like NetSPI, maybe a company like CrowdStrike. Do we want SentinelOne? Do we want CrowdStrike Falcon? Do we want Microsoft Defender? Decisions like that involve tools and individual actions will be made at the first point in the planning process. And then generally that organization will then execute on that plan to just start buying products and services, and that is the only thing that they do. The problem with that approach is that once you've rapidly installed a bunch of tools, have you actually made a difference to your organization? Has the risk actually reduced, or have you now got to foot the bill for a bunch of different security products without really knowing if you are safer as a result? Now, the good news is if you've suddenly feeling like that is actually quite a familiar flow to your organization or maybe organizations you've worked in previously, there is a better approach that you can take, and it's not too difficult to follow. Better still, organizations like Trinexia and NetSPI are very well equipped to help you make this change to a better playbook for delivering security. So you'll note here that we've got the same top level objective. We want to prevent a ransomware attack on our organization. But instead of jumping straight to products, we start with risk identification. That is the critical step here. Most organizations will go to products because they're easy to understand and risks are complicated. But if you spend the time understanding where your risks are, you'll find that you're able to make much more informed decisions about the right software. And that's where teams like Trinexia can help you understand, well, if you've got these risks, here are the vendors that are appropriate for you and your budget and your resources. When you make decisions like that, you can start to carefully pick solution, in this case, A and B, that mitigates the risks that you know about, such as we have a weakness in our email security, or we've got a weakness in our people and our vulnerability to social engineering attacks. We need a solution for that problem. We can't just buy something that is a great product that has some AI to detect phishing emails. We've got to do something more specific for our organization. Once you've done that, you found the right solutions and you implement those, the next change from the norm is to validate that those solutions are doing what you think they are. It is very common to see solutions that don't deliver on what they promise. That can be because of flaws in the technology, but it can also be because it's just not a good fit for your organization and your context. Once you conduct those tests, and that's where a company like NetSPI can come in to actually test your security for you, you'll be able to go back to your board, your colleagues, and your business as a whole, of course, your customers too, to say, we have confirmed that we have reduced the risk here. This isn't money that we're just spending to look like we're ticking boxes. We have confirmed that we have reduced our risk and we have addressed our objective of preventing an attack in most of the scenarios that we're up against. It is a much better model to operate. And if this is one thing that you might take a picture of your screen on, this is probably the time to do so. The next thing I'm going to do is touch very briefly on another story from when NetSPI's applied our testing processes to the cloud, and then I will move on to give you a little bit of an idea of the technology that we use to deliver on that too. So hopefully you've got a picture of this. If you want to, we'll be able to share this slide as well, post this call if you need a copy. All right. So let's take a look at the first part of this problem, the assets that you need to know about and how you actually identify the vulnerabilities, because that is where NetSPI is really strong. It's what we do. So one of the things that we do, among many others, is test cloud environments, very similar to the kind of environment that the Safe Wallet team operated and clearly had some weaknesses in that they weren't aware of. Now, you can use vulnerability scanners to identify things in the cloud, but those vulnerability scanners are focused on technical flaws in isolation, and that doesn't reflect the reality of the world we now live in. You might have systems that are not vulnerable to direct exploits with vulnerabilities that have CVE numbers attached to them, but that does not mean that you're safe. So let's take a look at this example I've got on screen, which is from Microsoft Azure, a comparison to the AWS environment. In this environment, we were working with an organization that gave us access as a standard user, a user that didn't have special privileges inside their organization because they wanted to understand, while we don't have anything coming up on our vulnerability scanners, what would it be like in the scenario where we were subject to a real world attack from a fairly sophisticated adversary, similar to the Lazarus Group? What we were able to demonstrate is that we could, as a standard user, navigate around the environment that they had built in Azure and identify routes that we could take to go from a standard user to an administrator of every single laptop and endpoint in their organization, which would have very easily enabled us to pivot to being global administrators for their entire business. The path we took was not the kind of path that you would expect to see from any kind of vulnerability scanner. This was only identifiable through human beings going through this path and simulating an attack. The route we took was via an automation account, which is part of Azure that lets you automate some of your business processes, particularly in the cloud, to keep things running smoothly and easily for your IT teams. We were able to access that automation account as a standard user. We weren't able to modify it, but we were able to read the source code. And in doing so, we were able to find a reversible password that we could extract from that and use to access Microsoft Intune, which some of you may be familiar with, but that's a component that Microsoft offers of their cloud services that lets you manage your endpoint devices. Specifically, it allows you to run PowerShell across all of those devices if you wish to do so, and that is something that we could demonstrate for them. So from a very low-level user, we were able to start running PowerShell code across almost every single endpoint that they had in their organization. And all we needed to do at that point is run PowerShell on a machine that was used by one of their administrators. And we would have been very easily able to get full control of their entire cloud environment and their on-premises environment, effectively giving us enough power to be able to execute any ransomware attack that we wanted, steal any data that we wanted, and at no point would we have had to use a traditional exploit with a CVE number attached to it. This is where proactive security becomes almost critical to the success of your own security program. If you focus on vulnerability scans and CVEs, you will make some progress in the right direction. But if you don't take the time to run scenario-based tests, the kind that very few organizations can support you with, but NetSPI is one of those organizations in partnership with Trinexia, you will miss serious gaps in your security. I say that because it's my job to execute on these tests alongside my team to make sure that you've got the visibility that you need to close the security risk that you have before groups like the Lazarus Group can target you. Now, I think it's worth touching a little bit on how we actually do that at NetSPI. So what I'm actually going to do now is attempt to bring up our platform that we've got. Now, I'm going to have to make a slight change of plans to our normal flow because our platform is undergoing quite a lot of change at the moment. And what that means is that our demo environment isn't quite ready for prime time. But in our partnership with Trinexia, I never like to allow things to slow us down. So what I'm going to do instead is take a look at our internal environment that we use. And I'll show you some of the stuff that we use inside NetSPI. That will give you an idea of the technology that we have and how it can benefit you. So we're not going to have quite as much data as we usually have to work with today. but I'll be able to show you some of what we've got in an alternative environment. So I'm going to take a moment to swap over our screen display, and I'll take you on a little tour of the technology that we use. And of course, if you do have any questions, please do drop them in the chat, and I'll get on that as soon as I can. So in a moment, you should see the NetSPI platform, and I'll walk you through how this is something that you might find useful inside your team. So what you're looking at the moment is the dashboard of our platform in dark mode, of course. We do have a light mode as well, if you prefer. The idea here is to give you a dashboard for managing security testing, the world of proactive security more broadly, all in one place. There are quite a lot of companies that will give you dashboards and websites that you can work with, but there are few that operate with the level of integration that we can offer at NetSPI. So what you're looking at right now is the calendar on the right-hand side of everything that you can see your NetSPI team doing. Any upcoming projects would be shown on here, and you'd be able to jump straight to them, as well as your action items. That makes it very easy if you're running a security team with a lot of plates to spin, a lot of work to do. You don't have to worry about constantly keeping on top of emails to understand what security testing is going on. You'll be able to visit the dashboard here. You'll know what you need to do, what the deadlines are, and when it's all happening. And of course, when it's happened, you'll actually get all this data on the left as well. You've got an idea of how many findings that you need to process. You can break that down into the severities, and you've got your most vulnerable assets. You can pick a couple of these assets up here. They'd be the names that you're most familiar with. That'll tell you where your risks are, so you can immediately jump into that. So if we then take a look at the bottom here, you've got what we call engagements. You might hear them referred to as projects as well. So these are our test projects. I'm afraid our full demo environment's limited at the moment, but I can pick on one of these as an example, and we can use it to give you a little bit of a walkthrough about the way we work. So in any one of our engagements, you'll get a description of the work that we're doing and the scope that we're working to. This is all agreed with you in advance as part of the conversations that we have. What that means is that at any point, whether it's you or a colleague, you can look at this particular project or engagement in the NetSPI platform, whether it's at the time or a year down the line, and you know what was tested, and of course, the results that came out of that. You've also got a comment system here. So you can send messages directly to the NetSPI team, and they can talk back to you both during the project and afterwards to help you with any remediation work that you're doing. What that means is that if you're an organization that's working at scale with multiple security tests running throughout the year, you don't have to worry about having a report that comes in a PDF format and your consulting team is gone, and you can no longer ask them questions and get the support that you need. And that's why we really do believe in proactive security, and we think that part of that is being there for our customers. So what that means is once you've started a project with us, that communication continues, and it remains once you've finished working on that project too. If you've got questions around, say, the findings that I'll bring up next, you can talk to us directly and we'll work with you to address this kind of thing. Now, as you'd expect from a platform like this, we can show you all of the findings that you've got up on screen, with the risk ratings and various other bits of data. One of the things I particularly like, it's a small quality of life feature, is that we have a lot of data hidden behind all of these. And you can actually pick any of the columns that you want to display. So even though we've just got 5 or 6 here that are currently displayed, if you particularly care about the CVS SB3 score, you can simply select that column and pull that information in. We don't have that in our demo environment, but you'd see that under our normal testing environments. You can edit this data to show whatever you want to show, and of course you can pick on any one of these to be able to take a look in more detail about what we found and what it means for you. So on every single one of our findings, you'll get a detailed description, nothing brief, nothing that's just a sentence or two. You'll get meaningful descriptions of the actual attack path that we could undertake. You'll also see the various data sources that you can refer to understand what's happening and the various prevention steps that you can take to actually mitigate the problem too. You can see related findings. I think that's a particularly important one because a lot of pen tests, it's very difficult to see the relationship. Similar findings means that you can take that to your security team and make sure that they're well equipped to address everything in one go and you're not bouncing back and forth. And you can also see whether or not these particular findings were seen in other projects as well. This is another thing that we've heard from many customers over the years, where when we conduct a security test and another organization that they're working with is talking to them, they might find that there are common patterns and vulnerabilities, but they don't necessarily have that understanding of where the same issues are appearing. So if you have a web application test or a mobile application test that is uncovering the same kind of findings that a totally separate team is uncovering in your organization, you know that you've got a fundamental security gap, and you know that you've now got the opportunity to correct that once for one cost and one amount of time, fixing it for multiple projects in one go. So it's a massive efficiency gain. We do know that some organizations care about CVE, so we can leverage that too. And then you've got a live comments feed as well, so you can have that direct form of communication. We do keep an audit log of changes that are made, but I think in this case, because we're looking at an individual finding, one of the most interesting components of this is that you can add comments at a finding level as well. So I talked about comments at a project level, and you can certainly use those to talk about the deadlines that we're working to, any data that we need to share between our organizations. But you can also use it as an opportunity to speak to us about specific findings, which is so much easier than sending emails back and forth, or even using a Teams chat or Slack or something like that, because you can send a comment that is specifically tied to this vulnerability, and our vulnerability team inside NetSPI will know that you've done that. They'll have all of the information available on the right-hand side about the current state of the situation, the dates in which it was found, anything else that they need to know. And perhaps most excitingly, we've got our attack paths here as well, which allows you to see the route that we took to actually exploit that vulnerability. All the information is there, which saves a lot of time for both organizations. Now, once we've done an individual project and you've got some specific findings at the back of it, you probably want to zoom out and have a look at the bigger picture as well. And that's where our program management view comes into play. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've got that project view again. And most importantly, you can click through any of these to see the stage at which each of these projects are at, as well as any comments and action items that are at play. So if you are listening as a project manager or you have project managers in your team, here's the solution to their biggest problem right here for you. When it comes to managing a lot of security tests, and we have organizations that have dozens and dozens of security tests running with us, sometimes every month, if not every year, they find it difficult to work with other organizations that don't provide them with the means to know what testing is going on and what they need to do in terms of taking steps and action items by particular dates to get things done. If you've ever felt the frustration of security testing happening, but happening too slowly or delayed, or not happening because it's not been given enough time, there are all sorts of problems that you have probably seen before. We have designed the NetSPI platform to help prevent those problems ever happening again, if you choose to work with us and try Nexia on your security testing needs. On top of that, we also have our risk overview, which is a very useful way of articulating the risk that's been identified to your colleagues in your organization. So you've got your overall risk score, which we compute from a variety of different metrics. But ultimately, we're here to be able to demonstrate for you and your team that your risk has come down over time as a result of the work that you've been doing with us and the remediation that you've been working on inside your organization too. What we also like to do is provide some hard numbers so we can give you a risk score for applications, network, your cloud, and we can also give you a critical vulnerability count. While we don't have it in this environment, we do give you a percentile industry comparison. So just yesterday, for example, I was working with an organization in pharmaceuticals, and they wanted to know how they compare to other organizations in their industry. Our data set at NetSPI was able to tell them that inside the cloud space, they were operating at the top 21% of organizations. And for Microsoft 365 and the security of their things like email and their SharePoint environment, they were in the top 15%. What that told them is that while they still had vulnerabilities to fix, they were much better than the majority of their competitors. That helped them understand where they needed to spend time and money to further improve their security, and where maybe it would be better to acknowledge that they are already succeeding, and that time and money should be spent on other higher risk areas too. That's the kind of data that we've got on screen here that enables you to make major decisions about your time and your money that is very difficult to make without platforms like NetSPI's to give you data to back those decisions. We'll obviously give you useful information on where the risks are, not only in your assets, but in your projects too, because those projects might involve a range of assets. And we can also have a look at the different assets and engagements in a kind of circular graph like this as well. So you can see in most of the cases here, we're looking at network-based assets that have the problem. And you can see that if we go on to the other categories here, there's less to talk about. So most of it is network. There's a little bit in the way of application, but immediately if you get the question from, say, your own CISO or a customer who wants to understand, well, you must have visibility of your security. Where are your risks? You can say clear and simply, our risks are mostly around the network space, and here's what we're doing about it. Whereas if I have a look at applications, we're doing very well in the application space. Our security is consistently very strong, and our risk profiles are very low indeed. So network is our priority. This is the power to have the conversations that you need. And I'm very excited that we're able to provide this here at NetSPI. We've got some trend data as well. I wish those graphs would display, but usually what we're able to show you is the progress of remediation over time. Oh, excellent. They were just taking a little bit of time to load in this case. That gives you something. So you can see here that your remediation in this organization has kept kept the remediation level quite low. Ideally, what we'd like to see is that remediation line a little higher and the new findings one to be a little bit lower. But this is one of our test environments. What this does allow you to do, though, is take this graph to your leadership or to your customers and say, we are identifying new findings so we can prove we're doing good security testing. We can also show you that our remediation is high and we are bringing that number of findings down very rapidly. It is a great way to prove the progress that you're making. This graph on the right-hand side would usually display the days until remediation. So it would be a great way to demonstrate that the time between identifying an issue and fixing it is either low or it's decreasing, which is again a powerful tool to communicate that you are succeeding. Or in some cases, all of the data that I've been talking about is a great way to show that there are some limitations to the capacity of your current team and your current tool set, which makes data like this a great way to have a conversation around what more you need in terms of resources and budget as well. Plenty of other data to choose from, and I'm not going to go through graph by graph here because of the time that we've got left, but you can see that there's plenty of data to empower you to have good conversations internally and with your customers too. Of course, at any point, if you'd like some more data than we've got displayed here, you can just contact the NetSPI team and we'll start pulling that together with the data that we have behind all of this. Last thing I'll touch on very briefly is our retest log over here. No security testing would be complete without an understanding of how it ended, how you actually fixed it. So if we have a look in here, we can see that you can pick on any one of these random example data sets that we've got and see the amount of retesting that we've done and an idea of how much time elapsed between the test and the other projects that we've done. What that enables you to do is, of course, confirm that you have made a difference to the organization, the internal organizational risk that you measure, and know that you have closed the loop, as we like to say, that by the time you finish working with NetSPI, you've not only fixed the problem, but you've had it retested by NetSPI. In the vast majority of cases, we include retesting as part of our work, which is quite unusual in the industry. Most of our competitors will sell you a penetration test and they'll deliver you a PDF report. As you can see from NetSPI, what we deliver is a true dashboard of risk, as well as a set of findings that you can go through. Now, of course, we can provide PDF documents if you need, as well as CSV exports. But if what you want is real, meaningful, proactive security inside your organization, there's not many better ways that you could approach it than working with Trinexia and NetSPI to get that outcome. Now, I'm going to stop here because we've only got a few minutes left and there may be a few questions that you might like to ask. So if there are, please feel free. I'm going to drop our screen share right now so that we can address any questions that have come up. And if there is anything that you'd like to follow up with afterwards, please don't hesitate to get in touch too. What I will do is bring up our other slide that we've got, just as a bit of a background on some of what we do. And I'll take a look at the chat now because I think there are a couple of questions in there. We've touched mostly on penetration testing as a service on the left-hand side today. There are some other products that we've got that we haven't talked about much here. And I think those are things that we might even be able to touch on just now as we wrap up. So let's have a look at our chat. Our Q&A. Okay, how many controls can we test through BAS? Okay, well, there is a question on breach and attack simulation. So we have coverage of the vast majority of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of at NetSPI, if you're comparing us to some of the competitors in this space, like Picker Security and so on, is that we have a human team that runs our breach and attack simulation platform. So every single time that we use breach and attack sim, you are guided by a human being, a consultant just like me, who is able to execute these attacks. So what that means in practice is if you have controls in place that a traditional breach and attack simulation platform cannot address, so say if you're working with Picker Security or some of the other vendors out there, and they don't have a play or a test for a particular control, at NetSPI, that's normal. We very much design our teams to be able to run on the fly whatever it is that you need to give you that test. And then we'll build that into our technology so you can run that yourself going forwards. We're a little bit different in that sense because although we have coverage of MITRE ATT&CK, we don't stop there. We work a lot harder than that to make sure that if you need something custom, we can build it and we can deliver it alongside you and your team in conversation as a service rather than as a standalone product as well. In terms of the multi-tenant side of things, we do have quite a lot of complex multi-tenanting across the whole of the NetSPI platform. The BAS module is indeed a module inside the NetSPI platform, so we can do some pretty fancy stuff in terms of having multiple organizations under an umbrella organization, if that's how you're structured as an entity, so that you can have the right teams with access to the right data, but also visibility at the top level as well, if that's what you need. The same is true for the rest of our technology stack as well. If you are looking at security testing, we can split that across different kind of organizations to be able to give you access to the right data you need while not displaying that data to every single person as well. If you are a tiered organization and you have subsidiaries and like, or if you are a managed service provider and you need to split that data so you can manage different customers too.